Hello everyone, welcome back to Open Line, talking about Tennessee's Season to Remember, an event honoring victims of murder from all across Tennessee. It'll be happening Thursday, and as I said at the top of the show, I always learn a lot from those who attend the event and from this show every year. We have with us Trina Scott. Her husband, David Scott, of the Clarksville Police Department, was murdered on duty in 2002. And Tina Fox, State Director of Victim Services. Again, glad you're both here.
Thank you.
All right. Trina, you've had to go through, so your husband, as you said, he was in a pursuit and then he was killed along with his partner.
Yes. People
were charged for that crime, right? What happened after that, and how difficult was that whole process, going to court and that kind of thing? What happened right after that?
Well, the search for him, first of all, because he ended up fleeing. So with the crash and the fire, you know, him seeing in the rearview mirror that my husband's car was in flames, he fled and went to Memphis, Tennessee. The law enforcement kept me in the loop. They pretty much caught him, apprehended him right away. And trial didn't happen for 2 years, but it wasn't a trial. He ended up pleading out, and he received 33 years. However, 30 for the armed robbery and 3 years for killing my husband and Jamil Baez Santiago. From there, victim advocacies and were there again for us to help us get through that time. It was very emotional for my family. I had 4 daughters, and at that time my baby was 4. So I had a 4-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 16-year-old.
Oh my goodness! Wow.
So not only did I have to go through the sentencing hearing and go through all of that, you know, I had to be that strong parent for my children, because we become instantly sole parents, you know, and I had to be that for my children. So I'm sure, like a lot of other victims have seen, you then kind of forget about yourself and you go into doing everything else for them. But truly, about 5 years after that, we had the first parole hearing. I received a call informing me that we could either go to the prison or attend via satellite. I think my family, my husband's family, we chose to go to the prison. I think it was the first time, and that was very emotional to walk in there. But again, you know, I guess I'm talking about how great the victim advocacy people are. I can't thank them enough for being there and holding my hand and walking me through. I never had to question anything, and they walked in prison with me, and they were there with me, and it was very difficult to see him and to tell my story to him, so that he could understand my loss, my grief, and my pain. And since then, I've had to do 2 other parole hearings, and my family and I chose to do them here in Nashville.
Because the first one, you were there just a few feet away from him, right?
Yes.
You're in the same room,
yes.
Obviously the same building, the same room. In the others, you're doing it by video conference, is
yes.
that right?
Mm-hmm.
And why do you feel like it's so important for you to say something at these parole hearings every time?
I feel like David and Jamil, they lost their voice. And I became that voice. And Jamil's wife and I are very close. She lives in Puerto Rico, so, you know, but I am the voice for both of us. And it's important for me to say how I feel and what I feel. This year, I had it up on my heart, and I went in And I forgave him. And my daughter, my baby who was 4 years old, her 20-year-old self was there, and she forgave him. She said she never knew her father. She couldn't remember him, but yet she forgave him. And I forgave him for me. I still think he needs to suffer the consequences and serve his time, but I forgave him for me and my family. So every time we go to a parole hearing, I want him to hear and know what he did. And I want him to know that he has to suffer the consequences. He has to serve his time, whether we forgive or not.
Yeah. Wow. And that there's a ripple effect. You're looking at a 4-year-old child who lost her father, and 16 years later she's at a parole hearing to forgive and to actively participate. But it's the ripple effect. It's a life ripple effect on families. It never changes. The loved one will not be there for Christmas, will not be there for birthdays, will not be there for high school graduation or college graduation, based on an offender's action and based on an offender's decision. So it's the ripple effect. And it not only affects the family members, but it does affect those who advocate for crime victims as well, because we see it day in and day out.
Right.
And how does the system work? And Tina, I'll ask you that. So there's a 33-year sentence, and it sounded like 5 years or so after he was up for parole for the first time. And now we've had other parole hearings. 3 other parole hearings. So how does that work? How quickly is someone up? And then how often does the parole hearing come back up?
Yeah, so it just kind of depends. Everything is based on Tennessee sentencing guidelines. And the Tennessee Department of Correction is the gatekeeper for time management. And so the parole board only hears cases whenever offenders are eligible. So in terms of how often, it just kind of depends. Parole board members and hearing officers review case files. Parole is a privilege. It is not a right, and so that is expressed at the parole hearing, that the parole board members have copious legal factors that they must review and consider, and public safety is the #1 legal factor.
Among those factors, how important is it? You've been to many, many, many of these hearings.
I have.
Which must break your heart. But how important is it, do you think, to the board to have someone from the family come and speak their truth? Someone from the family either, speak in some way about the impact this has had over and over again. What impact do you think that has?
It's a very critical piece. It's a very important factor. It is not obviously the determining factor, but it is a very important factor. Board members and hearing officers have the facts of the offense. They have the offender's conviction, and they rely on the conviction. Oftentimes they do not have the victim's voice or the victim's letter of opposition or impact statement. And so that is encouraged under state law, that crime victims be actively engaged in the process, and it is a legal factor to be considered. Again, it's not the determining factor, but it is a very, very important, critical factor.
Is this, and I'll ask you, Trina, this, is it overly burdensome that the parole hearings that you've had 3? I don't know what's right, but I want to ask you. I mean, so he was sentenced to 33 years. He's up for parole after 5. I don't know, how often is it then? Every several years?
I think we had that 5, and then I think in 2014, and then this one, 2018, so it seems to be every 4 years. The next one is in 2022, so we have another one coming up.
What do you think? Every 4 years, is that too much?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It's too much, but I'm not the Tennessee board, but for me and my family, it is a lot, because just when you think it's okay to go back in the water, or just when you think it's okay to just kind of breathe, I get this letter saying we're up for another parole hearing, and then our lives go back. When I walked into the parole hearing, I was like, I told Tina, I said, I'm good. I'm so good. I'm great. And as soon as I saw him via satellite, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I cried. I could not stop crying, and I think I'm great. But it's just so much, and he gets this, and that was my thing. I think the emotional part was, I get to see your face every 4 years, and I don't get to see my husband. So that's when I get that emotional thing. It's like, that's too much. I get to see how he's grown, and so it's very draining. And two, when I hear about how he sees family and how he sees his son, and my husband won't see our first grandson, who's named after him, and he won't spend Christmas, and he's missed graduations and weddings, and it is a lot. It's a lot.
Let me ask you, Tina, just as far as the structure of all of this. So in this case, it's every 4 years, and you said it obviously varies from time to time. How often are people successful at parole, I guess? How often is parole granted? Is there a number? Are there statistics? How does that work?
Yeah, well, first of all, being 95 to 97% of all incarcerated offenders will be released at some point. And so there are only about 3 to 5% who won't ever be released. So when you look at that, you have to consider, again, those legal factors. There are evidence-based practices inside institutions where offenders are actively engaged and participating in, and so that is a factor that the parole board looks at, in addition to the criminal history, how long they've served on a sentence and/or sentences. So there aren't two cases that are alike when it comes to the parole board. They look at those cases individually, and they vote independently based on the facts of the case, based on the legal factors as well.
And Tina, in your case, do they make a decision that day, or is it something you hear about later? Like, do they rule that day?
Yeah, so typically we have one presiding board member or one presiding hearing officer. And so for a board level case where the board members are engaged, it typically takes about 7 to 10 business days before a final decision is rendered. However, the board member who is presiding over the case will render his or her vote at the parole hearing.
So when you go, you'll hear a board member render his opinion, but you may not get the final say for a couple more days.
Right.
And we're not to be encouraged or discouraged by that one vote either. So, yeah.
What would it mean to you? How difficult would it be if he were paroled? And is it one person?
It's just one person.
It's one person.
Yes.
If this one person was paroled, how difficult would that be for you? What would that do?
It would again be the same as what I spoke of before, that he's able to walk around and he's able to be here, and my husband is not. And I do understand the system, and serving so much time, you will be released. That doesn't make it okay, but I know I have to accept whatever decision. Again, if I would have been sitting there and that parole board member said he was approved, it would have been hurtful, and I would have, but as always, they said, just don't think of it like that. Just wait. But he did say he was denying him, which, again, it became a bittersweet, I wanted him to stay longer. I didn't want it to come back up in 2022, but I truly don't know how exactly I will feel when he's released until he's released.
Right, right. All right, let's go to the phones. Let's go to Sandy here, who has waited for a bit. Sandy, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Go right ahead. What's on your mind?
Well, I just have a question. I too have a son who was killed by a driver, hit and run, and killed my son. So my question is, am I able to, how do I go about getting his name on the list?
Right, for this season to remember. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Thank you for that, Sandy.
Yes.
What would you say there?
Yeah, I would encourage Sandy to come out on Thursday evening, 5:30, to be engaged in this year's event. We have registration forms on site to register crime victims who are not currently registered with us. So we encourage Sandy to come out along with her family. We also have ornaments, so if she doesn't have one, she doesn't have to worry about purchasing one. We do have those on site as well.
And that's great. So it does. You said you sent out invitations, and those invitations are going to people, obviously that you're aware of, but anyone can come, whether they are the victim, their family member was murdered or not.
That's right.
But especially if they were, this is an opportunity to come and be among people who have gone through some of the same stuff.
That's right.
And you encourage anybody, like Sandy, to come on out.
Yes, please, Sandy, come. Yes.
All right, we're going to take a break. If you want to call in, there's the number, 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. We'll take a break. Continue our conversation right after this.